to the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Mckern. Join us weekly for tales of cursed media, haunted web series, ARGs, creepypastas, unfiction, and all things horror. Sit back, dim the lights, and welcome to the Wicked Webs We Weave.
Bonjour and benez-vous. Sit back and dwell in the darkness, mon ami. Warm yourself to the verbal fires. This is the Wicked Webs We Weave. The Westminster burial ground spirits spare no terror when they appear to the living. It's no wonder that the cemetery is considered one of the top 10 haunted places in Baltimore. From the creepy catacombs to moved or disturbed graves, the stories and hauntings are endless. It seems most of the dead are unwilling to accept that they have passed on, or are unaware of the fact. They stick around in their afterlife, showing themselves to the living, unable to rest in peace. Visitors of the cemetery and burial grounds report bodiless voices, sounds of footsteps walking towards them, and horrific screams. Some claim the grip of icy hands on their shoulder, unexplainable foul stenches, and the encounter of cold spots throughout the grounds. The Westminster Presbyterian Western Burial Ground, located in Baltimore, Maryland, on Fayette and Green Street, was purchased in 1786. It had been a part of John Howard's peach orchard and became the final resting place for the elites of the region. A church was built directly atop the burial grounds in 1852. The web history has it that a local law required cemeteries in the city proper to physically connect with an adjoining church, but it actually was raised to provide a growing western Baltimore population with a place to worship. Property being tight, the structure was plopped in the middle of the boneyard, straddling gravestones and burial vaults to create a hybrid catacomb system between its supporting arches and under its floor. But the church membership created by the 1920s, the flock eventually moved away into the suburbs, leaving the historic graveyard deserted, in disrepair, and vandalized for decades. In 1970, the University of Maryland got a hold of the land, and in 1981, the Westminster Preservation Trust began to manage the property, and are in the ongoing process of restoring it. Thanks to their work, the church, now Westminster Hall, and cemetery are again open to the public from dusk till dawn. Dawn to dusk, rather. The graveyard now holds the plots of a deceased plainfolk, assorted Hippoli 8 congressmen, 5 mayors, Revolutionary War and War of 1812 veterans, a small army of generals, and the local celebrities like Edgar Allan Poe, all who found Westminster to be their last stop, and not very many of them seem to be resting in peace. Notables of the burial ground. Over the 60 years before the new church was built, those laid to rest in the cemetery included many influential and important figures, merchants, statesmen, politicians, and dozens of officer and soldier veterans of the America. The Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 were buried in the General Sam Smith, James McHenry, Paul Bentelot, Nathaniel Ramsey, Robert Gilmore, James Sterling, John Hollins, Robert Calhoun, James Buchanan, and John McDonough are all buried there. Not sure if any of these notable figures have stuck around in the afterlife. Still, some may be part of the paranormal activity that permeates the burial ground. However, all others aside, the most popular of the cemetery's residents is Edgar Allan Poe. The life of Edgar Allan Poe. Born in 1809, Edgar Allan Poe was one of the most influential American writers and poets of all time. He is most famous for his poetry and short stories, particularly those of mystery and the macabre. A central figure of Romanticism, Poe was one of the country's earliest connoisseurs of the short story. He is also credited for creating the detective fiction genre and contributing to the science fiction genre. Poe had a financially difficult life and career as the first American writer to earn a living by his writings alone. Poe's father abandoned him, his siblings, and his mother when he was a year old. Sadly, his mother passed away the following year, leaving Poe an orphan. He was then fostered by the Allen family, though never legally adopted. Poe struggled with alcohol and gambling as a young adult age, and eventually ended up in Baltimore in 1835. At 26 years of age, Poe married his 13-year-old cousin, Virginia Clem, and lived with his aunt and grandmother Poe. His life took him through several positions as an editor, the military, and even a try for Congress. His alcohol and gambling debt kept him from succeeding at all ventures he took on. When Poe's wife Virginia died of consumption, now known as tuberculosis, in 1847, Poe's life took a tailspin. He never recovered from her death. However, some of his best-known works are inspired by his love and loss of his beloved wife. Poe went back to Richmond, Virginia, where he lived out his days until his mysterious death in 1849. The death of Edgar Allan Poe. There is a great mystery surrounding the death of Edgar Allan Poe. Reportedly sober at the time, Poe was found back in Baltimore, where he lived with Virginia. It's also where she is buried. It's said he was found wandering the streets feverish and delirious after leaving the horse he came in on saloon, a frequent watering hole for Poe. Oddly, Poe was dressed in someone else's clothing. He was taken to a hospital and died a few days later. The intimate details of Poe's death and his death certificate are said to have been lost or destroyed, adding to the mystery. Some speculate he died from alcohol poisoning. Some say from a drawn-out case of rabies. Other causes include delirium, heart disease, epilepsy, syphilis, meningitis, malaria, and even carbon monoxide poisoning. However, one of the oddest theories in 1872 was that Poe died by cooping, a form of electoral fraud. Cooping was the kidnapping of citizens to force them to vote for specific candidates. The victim would be piled with alcohol, held in a room, and threatened with beatings and death until they would comply. To fool the voting officials, they would put another person's clothing on the victim so that they could vote numerous times. Often kidnappers would use disguises such as a wig, fake beards, or fake mustaches. Perhaps this is the real cause of death for Poe. The sightings of Poe around the burial grounds are a common occurrence, and some claim he has even spoken to them. He has been spotted wearing a long black coat, wide-brimmed black fedora. A wide-brimmed black fedora, and a scarf covering his face. He stands solemnly in front of his grave as if he longs for another shot at life. Mysteriously, the same type of figure was seen yearly on the anniversary of his death, from 1920 to 2009, standing before Poe's grave, leaving red roses and a bottle of Poe's favorite drink, cognac. No one has ever confirmed if it is an apparition of Poe or one of his living fans. Like most hauntings, there are many takes on the story, and maybe that's how spirits do it. Everything in life is a matter of perception, they say. Poe is also seen at the altar inside the church and underground in the catacombs. Sightings and stories abound, but it's clear that no matter what or where, when Poe's ghost has been sighted, the man's spirit sticks around the cemetery, perhaps in reminiscence of his unsatisfactory earthly life. And now for another tradition in Baltimore, Maryland, celebrating the life of Edgar Allan Poe. Who was the Poe toaster? We still have no idea. In Baltimore, they're keeping the tradition of visiting Edgar Allan Poe's grave for his birthday, but without the mystery. It was an annual tribute as mysterious as its honoree. Every year on Edgar Allan Poe's birthday, a masked man would leave 3 red roses and a bottle of cognac on his grave. From around 1949, the centennial of Poe's death, until 2000, this somebody or somebodies toasted the famous author, who was born this day in 1849. They usually came sometime between midnight and 6 a.m., wrote the Baltimore Sun, Laura Lippman in 2000. No one ever tried to unmask the visitor, she reported, but his ritual was watched by a small group of onlookers. The traditional uniform of the Poe toaster was an all-black outfit with a white scarf and a big hat, as can be seen in this Life magazine photograph in 1990. From 1977 until the end, that crowd included Jeff Jerome, now former curator of the Poe House. Bob McMillan of the Herald-Citizen described how Jerome would wait every year for the visit to Poe's grave, which is Baltimore's Westminster burial ground, a small graveyard in the Gothic-looking desecrated church, deconsecrated. Nobody knows why the Poe toaster toasted the writer with cognac, though we speculate this is Poe's favorite drink, and this is why. As for the roses, Poe enthusiasts think the gesture represents the 3 persons whose remains are beneath the monument: Poe, his wife Virginia Clem Poe, and his mother-in-law Maria Clem. Over the years, Jerome had become the keeper of the notes often left graveside, and the tradition. He was also there in 1999 to see a note indicating the torch had been passed, and the toaster had died, leaving his sons to carry on the tradition. But things were different, McMillan writes. The sons didn't always take the tradition as seriously as their father. Sometimes the toaster showed up in street clothes, sometimes notes were left that were completely off target, and a disappointed Jerome withheld them, simply telling the crowd that the toaster had come and gone. Then in 2009, the tradition stopped altogether. Probably it was just in time. Jerome also suggested that the attention the yearly visit received may have been scared off the toasters. The Poe Society, somewhat scathing notes that would be copycats hoping for the same kind of recognition, have been dismissed as faux toasters. But a Jerome-sanctioned comeback, the toaster, happened in 2016, when the tradition was resurrected by the Maryland Historical Society, who held auditions for Baltimore's next Poe toaster, writes Daniel DeBeck from Mental Floss. He dressed the same and had a similar ceremony, but this toaster wasn't anonymous, and the event was a public celebration. The new toaster will walk again this weekend on January 21st. Other ghosts and haunts of the Westminster burial grounds. Cemetery visitors have reported hearing bodiless voices, footsteps and screams, feeling the grip of invisible, icy hands, sniffing inexplainable stenches, and encountering cold spots. There are numerous alleged sightings of spirits and dark, misty figures roaming the grounds, often looking more lost than the living. Ghost hunters have captured EVPs and photos of the dearly departed in orbed shadow form. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. One suspected cause of the eeriness is the church itself, because it was thrown up in the middle of the graveyard. It's said that the cemetery's brick paths were used as a foundation. There are some tombs that are now inaccessible to visitors, and there's nothing more noisy than a lonesome, forgotten ghost. Another in the movement of graves during the rebuilding of the church, a whole section of Revolutionary War soldiers thought lost was later discovered under one of the walkways, and other bodies were likewise stuffed, shuffled around, or just plain lost. God only knows how many plots were covered or moved because of the church. It was said that the kids could be seen playing with the skulls in the graveyard. Davish Hall, another source of potential spookiness, is the oldest medical school building in the U.S., dating back a couple centuries, and was where bodies were dissected by the students. It was also built on property carved from John Howard's farm. So guess where the cadavers came from? Digging up bodies for anatomical studies became commonplace. The midnight raids, though, so upset the locals that they once hung a student's grave robber that they had caught in the ghoulish act. Vandals and thieves were also a constant problem. They left the bodies intact but stripped off anything of value, like jewelry. Add to the macabre mixed tales of people buried alive, although for what reason we never did discover, and you have a perfect storm. Spooks neglected, abused, dissected, relocated, built over, lost. It's no wonder there are so many reports of Westminster apparitions. There are several haunts that are renowned at the Westminster. One is the Screaming Skull of Cambridge, of a long ago murdered minister. It's said to screech 24/7, and the lore is that when they planted the clergyman, they gagged his skull's yap and covered it in cement in an effort to shut him up. It usually works, but woe to anyone that hears the scream. It's supposed to drive you insane. Another often cited spirit is that of the nameless, elderly, white-haired spirit, seen walking slowly between the rows of tombstones as if in search of a particular marker. There's also lore of an insane woman's ghost haunting the catacombs. She was considered so raving mad that she was buried in her straitjacket. Her crazed laughter is supposed to echo through the catacombs, and her presence has reportedly followed folk throughout the graveyard. And don't disrespect a grave. The shadow of an old groundskeeper may show up and start chasing you with a shovel. The ghost is said to act as if it's under the influence, as he is most of the time on Earth, and will swear up a storm while shooing you out of his cemetery. The second most famous spirit is that of a 16-year-old Lucia Watson Taylor, who died back in 1816. She's been seen many times kneeling by her own grave and praying, a long-haired lass dressed in a loose white dress. The second monument added in 1875 after Western female high school teacher Sarah Sigourney Rice and Baltimore school children waged a Pennies for Poe campaign to build a proper memorial. That's where he's actually buried now. In commemoration of this success, George Childs actually covered half the cost. It's a tradition for visitors to leave a penny at Poe's grave, even today. hauntsandhistory.blogspot.com, tourbaltimoreghosts.com, smithsonianmag.com, and the Edgar Allan Poe website for archives. These websites helped immensely in the research in making this episode. I'd like to thank you once again for listening to the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. Please like and subscribe for our Tales of Haunted History weekly uploads. If there is a location, a haunt that you would like to see me cover, please leave it in the comments. And thank you so much again, mon ami. Until we meet again, au revoir.